An alien ship thought it had captured another helpless old man, but they didn't know he was a master of survival, a hunter of hunters, and the key to a plan that would shake the galaxy. What began as an abduction turned into a full-blown rebellion, led not by soldiers, but by a family that remembered everything and planned even more. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and show a thumbs up by liking the video. You won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's jump into the story. The hum of alien machinery echoed quietly through the corridors of the transport ship. Pale blue lights flickered along the walls, casting long shadows on the rows of containment cells that lined the hold. Inside those cells, dozens of captured beings sat, some trembling, some whispering in their own languages, others frozen in silent disbelief. Among them were creatures with scaled skin, fur-covered faces, and tentacles for limbs. But one stood out, not for how strange he looked, but for how ordinary he did. An old human man sat calmly, hands folded on his lap, eyes quietly scanning his surroundings. While others showed fear or confusion, he watched with quiet interest, like someone who had seen worse and wasn't easily rattled anymore. Captain Morvac of the Planetary Union stood at the end of the corridor, observing the scene. A towering figure with 4 eyes and thick armored skin, he wore the symbol of high command etched across his chest plate. Morvac had traveled across dozens of galaxies, collecting samples for what they called necessary biological studies. Earth was just the latest addition to the list. From orbit it had seemed a rich but simple world. No interstellar travel, no known defense systems, and plenty of species to study. They had scanned quickly, landed briefly, and gathered their subjects without much resistance. Morvac had done this so many times he no longer thought twice about the lives they disrupted. But this human, the old one, kept drawing his attention. Morvac approached the cell, the floor panels buzzing softly beneath his boots. He tapped a control panel, deactivating the sound barrier so he could speak. The man looked up slowly, his face marked with wrinkles that hinted at a long, weathered life. His gray hair was unkempt, his eyes sharp and blue, but strangely calm. "You're not afraid," Morvac said, speaking through the universal translator clipped to his collar. The man gave a slight smile. "Afraid of what, you?" "Nah. I've seen worse storms than you." Morvac's eyes narrowed. "Most specimens cry, plead, or scream. You sit there as if this is a hotel room. You ever spend a night in the Yukon during a blizzard?" "The man replied, shrugging. "This is warmer than my cabin used to be." The captain wasn't sure if this was some form of humor or madness. He had been trained to handle aggression and panic, not whatever this was. "You're a primitive species," he said, stepping closer. "Our mission is to study life forms across the galaxy. Yours is no different. You should feel honored." The man chuckled, slow and amused. "You didn't answer my question." Morvac paused. "What question?" "Are you hunters?" The alien captain's brow furrowed. "We are researchers, scientists. You're being used for the greater knowledge of the universe." "That's not what I asked," the man said again, voice steady. "I asked if you were hunters." Morvac tilted his head, irritated. "If you must see it that way, then yes. We find, we capture, we analyze." The man nodded as if confirming a private theory. "Hunters," he repeated under his breath. "That's what I thought." He stood slowly, with the kind of movement that didn't waste energy. Morvac didn't react at first, but something about the man's presence shifted. He didn't look fragile anymore. He looked like someone waiting for the right moment. "You ever hunt?" the man asked, now looking Morvac straight in the eyes. "No," Morvac answered. "That's beneath our kind." "Well, I have," the man said. "Spent 40 years tracking bears, elk, and even one mountain lion that nearly got the best of me." You learn a lot out there in the wild. You learn patience, you learn silence, but most of all you learn this. If you think you're the hunter and you're wrong, you're already halfway to being dinner. Morvac felt his claws tighten. "You think you pose a threat to me? You're old, weak, trapped. You're light years from your planet." The man smiled wider now, and it wasn't the kind of smile that came from humor. It came from knowing something the other person didn't. "You made a mistake," he said simply. "You thought Earth was easy. You saw no starships, no laser weapons, no fancy space talk, so you thought we were helpless." Morvac didn't reply. "Let me ask you this," the man continued, his voice low, steady. "When you came to our world, did you bother going down to the ground? Did you see the people? The land? Or did you just run some scans from space and move in quick?" The captain said nothing. "I figured as much," the old man said. "If you'd spent any time with us, you'd know we've been surviving impossible things long before you showed up. We've made war an art, turned disasters into lessons. We learned fast, real fast." Morvac's shoulders twitched, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. "You may have taken us," the man added, "but that doesn't mean you've won." Morvac activated the sound barrier again without another word, retreating a few steps. He looked back at the old human who now stood in complete stillness, watching him. Not like prey watches a predator, but like a trap watches the one who's about to step into it. And in that silent gaze, Morvac saw something he hadn't expected. Danger. Real, human danger. And it was waiting. Aaron moved carefully through the control wing of the ship, pretending to check power outputs while quietly watching the containment feed. He was young by his species standards, still new to the work of field science, though the Federation called it something grander, evolutionary acquisition. That made it sound like progress. But lately, Aaron wasn't so sure. Especially not after watching the old human. There was something about that man. Something unsettling. He didn't behave like the others. No panic. No despair. He spoke like he wasn't trapped, like he was just waiting. And now, others were changing too. Some of the human prisoners had started gathering near the edges of their cells, whispering to each other with more purpose. At first, Aaron thought it was just fear bringing them together, but now he wasn't so certain. It felt more like planning. Captain Morvac was becoming more irritated by the day. He'd ordered double scans on the human's brain, checked for implants, even ran thermal stress tests. Nothing strange appeared, but Aaron saw it plainly. This old man wasn't ordinary. There was experience behind those eyes, and not just the kind you get from aging. It was the quiet confidence of someone who'd been through fire and walked away stronger. Elliot Kane. That's what the prisoner's file said. Retired wilderness guide. No criminal record. No military history. Just an old man from the forests of northern Canada. But that same man had somehow shifted the atmosphere of the entire holding deck with nothing but words. His stories had spread like smoke. They say he once survived 4 days lost in the Rockies with nothing but a pocket knife, whispered one of the young prisoners. He trained with grizzlies, joked another, laughing nervously. Taught them how to set snares. The stories weren't true, at least not all of them. But Aaron understood their power. These humans, scared and stripped of everything they knew, were beginning to believe in Elliot. And belief was dangerous. Far below the deck, in one of the quiet holding bays, a girl with dark curls and a calm expression tapped slowly at the edge of her bench. Her name was Selah Kane, Elliot's granddaughter. Unlike her grandfather, she had not remained quiet. She had been studying the rhythms of the ship's control system, counting the seconds between power resets and analyzing the behavior of the interface panels. It was easy for her. Patterns were something her mind caught on to quickly. Before she'd been taken, she was working with a small cyber defense team based out of Ottawa. What they did wasn't technically legal, but it wasn't malicious either. They built digital shields to keep bad actors out of private systems. Selah hadn't planned to be abducted by aliens. But now that she was here, stuck on a massive ship powered by tech far more advanced than Earth's, she found it oddly familiar. It was all just logic, after all. Ones and zeros. No matter how alien the interface looked. She smiled to herself. They hadn't noticed what she'd done yet. While being moved between holding cells during the early days of her capture, she'd managed to swipe a small, palm-sized scanning tool from one of the lab techs. It wasn't powerful, but it was. Enough to give her an idea of the systems they were using, and enough to slip in a bit of code. just a whisper of it. A suggestion in the language of machines. Back in the control wing, Aaron noticed something strange. For the third time in a week, a secondary power conduit had gone dark for 2.7 seconds before coming back online. That wasn't normal. Nothing on this ship glitched 3 times without reason. He frowned and checked the logs. Nothing flagged, no warnings, no alerts, just silence. Too much silence. Captain Morvac stood alone on the command deck, gripping the edge of the control panel, watching as his ship fell apart piece by piece. The walls flickered with failing lights, the doors behind him had sealed shut, and the command codes he entered returned nothing but error messages. It was as if the ship no longer recognized him. In truth, it didn't. The humans had taken control not with force but with something far more dangerous: patience, planning, and understanding. The silence was broken by a soft hiss as the main door opened, not because Morvac allowed it, but because someone else did. Elliot Kane walked through, steady and composed, followed by several others. Behind him were Ryan, Sela, and a boy who had barely spoken since the day he was captured, Milo Kane, Elliot's youngest grandson. He was small, quiet, and had gone mostly unnoticed, but now he carried himself with the stillness of someone who had been waiting for his moment. Morvac drew his sidearm, hands shaking. "You're still light years from your planet," he said. "You have no idea where you are. Even if you control this vessel, you can't survive out here." Elliot didn't flinch. "We're not planning on drifting forever," he said. "But we're not going back just yet either." Sela moved to the control station, fingers gliding across the unfamiliar interface as though it were her own. With a few swift movements, she redirected the ship's navigation to a pre-selected location, an uninhabited moon orbiting a quiet, overlooked star system. A place the Federation wouldn't look. Milo stepped forward and placed a small device onto the control panel. It pulsed once with a soft light. "This will lock the core systems," he said quietly. "They can't override it now. No more backdoors. No emergency codes." Morvac's eyes widened. You programmed it? That child?" Elliot smiled. "He watched, learned. Same way we've always done it. Never underestimate the quiet ones." The captain's weapon began to lower as he slowly realized the full extent of what had happened. It wasn't just about taking over a ship. It was about sending a message. Not one of anger, but of warning. The humans weren't asking for pity or justice. They were proving a point. "You could destroy me," Morvac said. "Destroy this ship. Broadcast to your world." Elliot shook his head. "We're not like you. That's your way. Capture, extract, destroy what doesn't fit. We're here to make sure you never do this again. Not to us, not to anyone." Sela turned to Morvac. "We've left traces of what happened here, hidden in the system. If another Federation ship finds this vessel, they'll know it wasn't sabotage. They'll see it was reclaimed by those you thought were too primitive to fight back." The captain's shoulders sank. He'd never imagined this outcome. To him, Earth had been nothing more than a page in a long list of undeveloped worlds. He'd never taken the time to look closer. Now he regretted it. Elliot stepped forward, stopping just in front of him. "You made one mistake," he said. "You confused quiet with weak. We don't always shout. We don't always fight with fists. But we remember. We've survived every kind of disaster. Our world could throw at us, we learn. And most importantly, we pass those lessons down." Morvac said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Hours later, the humans had fully secured the ship. Alien crew members were locked safely in unused chambers, alive, unharmed, and treated with a strange kindness they didn't expect. Elliot had insisted on it. "You don't win by becoming the thing you're fighting," he'd told Ryan earlier. "You win by staying human." From the bridge, Sela ran diagnostics. The ship was damaged but functional. She estimated they could survive out here for months if needed, longer if they found a suitable landing spot. She looked over at Milo, who sat quietly rechecking his lockout system. He gave her a small nod. It was done. Elliot walked to the large viewing window, staring out at the stars. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to exhale fully. They weren't home, but they were free. And more than that, they were united. Milo came to stand beside him. "What now?" he asked. Elliot didn't answer right away. He watched a small distant planet rise over the edge of a blue moon, light spilling gently across the darkness. "Now?" he said finally. "Now we decide who we want to be." Ryan approached from behind. "We've got food, power, and control. We could go home." "We could," Elliot said. "Or we could do something more." They all looked at him, curious. "There are other ships like this," Elliot continued. "Other species being hunted, studied, taken. We could warn them, help them, use this ship the way they never expected." Sella smiled. "A rescue crew. From Earth." "Call it what you want," Elliot said. "I just call it doing what's right." And with that, a group of once captured humans, armed with nothing but courage, knowledge, and memory, turned a stolen ship into something new. Not a weapon, not a fortress, a promise. Because long after the stars shifted and the ship disappeared into deep space, one truth remained clear. Some species forget, but humans remember. On his break, Aaron passed by the main containment corridor again. Elliot was sitting on his bench, calm as ever. He caught Aaron's gaze and gave a slight nod. Not a greeting, not a plea, just recognition, like he knew what Aaron was starting to suspect. "You see it, don't you?" Elliot said softly. The translator picked it up and projected the words into Aaron's ear. "I don't know what you mean," Aaron replied, though the lie felt heavy on his tongue. "I'm not the one you should be watching," Elliot said. "It's the ones who stopped being scared. Fear is noisy, but courage gets quiet when it's ready." Aaron left without another word, but Elliot's voice echoed in his mind. Something was happening beneath the surface, a slow tide rising. The humans were no longer waiting to be saved. They were preparing to save themselves. That evening, as the ship drifted silently through deep space, the laughter started. Soft, shared laughter from cell to cell. Not wild, not frightened, just human, real, alive. Aaron listened from his bunk, staring at the ceiling, his gut tight with unease. The last time he heard prisoners laugh was on the Brathax mission. 3 days later, the entire deck was locked down. He got up, walked to the monitoring station, and rechecked the system logs. Still no alerts. But on one line of code deep in the diagnostics, a message blinked for just half a second before vanishing. "Forest wakes when the wind is right." Aaron swallowed hard. The ghosts of the wild were no longer legends. They were real. They were here. And they were getting ready. The ship was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that creeps in before a storm, like the forest right before a predator makes its move. Captain Morvac noticed it the moment he stepped into the command corridor. The usual humming of machines was still. There, the blinking lights still pulsing in their rhythm. But something felt off. He couldn't name it, but it clung to him like a chill. His second officer reported that the containment fields had flickered again, only for a second. Still, that shouldn't have happened. Not with Federation tech. Far below in the lower holding cells, the change was already in motion. Elliot stood in his cell, arms crossed, while the other humans around him had gathered close to the edges of their containment lines. They weren't panicked anymore. There were no tears, no screams, just a quiet readiness. Some whispered. Some stretched their limbs like they were preparing for a long hike. Rion, a former firefighter and field engineer, had taken the role of an informal leader in one group. He'd once led a team through a burning warehouse collapse and lived to tell the tale. Now he moved cell to cell, sharing looks and short messages. "They'll come for us soon," he told a young woman in the next unit. "When the lights flicker again, be ready to move." She nodded, gripping a metal rod she'd quietly dislodged from her bunk and sharpened against the floor. Sella, from her corner cell, was counting seconds under her breath. The code she'd slipped into the ship's systems had been dormant for Days buried under layers of security. It wasn't designed to attack, it was designed to wait. Wait until all the right conditions lined up. Power cycles, temperature shifts, system idling. She wasn't sure how much longer it would take, but she knew they were close. Elliot had told her once back when she was small and he took her camping in the Yukon that you don't rush a hunt. You watch, you listen, and when it's time, you strike. Up in the tech bay, Aaron sat alone at the console reading through the system logs for the fourth time that hour. Nothing made sense. He could feel something building even if the data didn't show it. He glanced toward the security feed just in time to catch a flicker. For one heartbeat, the containment barriers dimmed again, longer this time. And then something new happened. One of the display panels in front of him flashed a single word in plain Federation standard. Awake. He stood quickly, heart thudding. He didn't send that message. No one he knew had access to that layer of the system, unless someone, or something, had taken root inside the ship's core. Just then the lights across the entire deck dimmed. Elliot opened his eyes, calm and steady. Around him, the other humans moved like a tide rising without sound. The containment field buzzed again, then blinked off. For a moment, no one moved. Then Elliot stepped forward, crossed the line, and the others followed. Doors opened. Not by force, but by code. Sela had done it. Her code had finally reached the central systems. She smiled as her own door slid open and stepped into the hallway, joining the others who now moved through the corridors with precision. Ryan met Elliot at the main junction. "Looks like your family's full of surprises," he said with a grin. Elliot gave a quiet nod. "She's got her grandmother's stubborn streak, and her own kind of fire." They began moving through the ship, spreading out in teams. Dara, a linguist from Brazil, had figured out how to jam the ship's outgoing transmissions by mimicking internal signal feedback. The aliens couldn't call for help. The ship was theirs now, bit by bit. Panic set in on the upper decks. Crew members scrambled, trying to reroute power and re-engage locks. But every time they thought they'd gained control, it slipped away again. Doors refused to close. Maps vanished from displays. Entire wings went dark without warning. Captain Morvac stood on the bridge shouting commands, but the ship was no longer listening to him. It had a new voice now. Human hands worked the controls. Human code ran through the systems. It was like watching a forest catch fire, silent at first, then unstoppable. A sudden tremor shook the ship as humans began sealing off sections, trapping alien officers one by one. Morvac turned toward the surveillance feed and saw Elliot walking calmly through the hall, surrounded by others. "You!" the captain shouted into the comm system. "You're still trapped. This is our ship. You don't belong here." Elliot stopped, looked directly into the nearest panel, and spoke. "Maybe not. But we didn't need to build it. We just needed to take it back." The captain gripped the edge of the console, his claws twitching. Behind him, another alert sounded. Main control node compromised. Elliot turned to the others and nodded. "It's time." Throughout the ship, the laughter began again. But this time it wasn't hidden and it wasn't soft. It was strong, proud. It moved through the halls like thunder. The hunters had awakened, and the hunt was no longer one-sided.